One of the coldest storms in history is descending across North America. With temperatures low enough to freeze exposed human flesh in less than 5 minutes, this storm is already reported to have killed 13 people. I'm heading out into it for a 3-day camping trip to test my equipment and myself. A 3-day vacation in Valhalla. Now, I don't want anyone to get hurt, and I certainly don't want blood on my hands, so if you're not experienced, please do not try to mimic what you see here. I grew up in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, and I have decades of experience in wilderness survival and extreme environmental conditions.
Dad, are you sure you know what you're doing? You've been trying to get this going all morning. I'm freezing.
Of course, I'm not the only one these days who's enjoying a sub-zero sabbatical. With the series of ships and the gaggle of global warming activists stuck in the polar ice caps, it seems like cold weather camping has really become the hot new thing. No, I wasn't thinking about the global warming team stuck in the ice at the South Pole that everyone knows about. I was thinking of the global warming team stuck in the North Pole that no one knows about because the media has simply not covered this story. The impetus for this untold story lays many years in the past, but began in earnest last spring, when, baited by decades of propaganda and hooked by the elite's guarantee of an ice-free Arctic, an armada of ships gathered to the coasts of northern Canada to await the record summer melt and the opening of the legendary Northwest Passage. An international anthropogenic A-team of world-class activists, adventurers, and athletes seeking glory, gold, and global warming. Amazingly, even a pod of personal watercraft joined alongside the yachts, each daring to become the first men in history to cross the deadly polar passage in a small boat. Among this group of steel-nerved sailors was perhaps the greatest living adventurer on Earth, Francis Charles Hedrich. The 55-year-old who had climbed Mount Everest, sailed solo around the world non-stop, completed the Paris-Dakar rally on motorcycle, and broken the world record rowing across the Atlantic Ocean. Among the other boats vying to become the first to row the passage was Arctic Jewel, led by extreme sports specialist and global warming activist Kevin Vallely. Fresh off his quest to become the first man to run across South America, Vallely, who previously had broken the world record skiing to the South Pole of Antarctica, was the keynote speaker in the Economist's Global Economics Forum in Oslo, Norway, early last year, where he and the biggest banking and corporate interests on Earth gathered together to persuade governments to take immediate action to stop global warming. Now, with the financial backing of one of the world's largest privately held corporations, Vallely and his hand-picked team of Irish sailors sought to become the first to row the passage and draw the world's attention to the ice-free Arctic and the perils of global warming. In fact, with written guarantees of an ice-free Arctic from the world's largest media corporations and most prestigious environmental groups like the Sierra Club of Canada, and even the most respected scientific organizations like NASA and the European Space Agency, the environment had become so charged and reached such a state of frenzy that even a network TV reality show had arrived in the Arctic to film the 7-man jet ski team Dangerous Waters attempt to become the first men to sea-doo across the Arctic Circle. The carnival on the coasts of northern Canada had reached fever pitch, and the athletes and activists eagerly awaited the first sign of open water. Come the spring-thaw, the race was on to make the biggest splash, and the largest global warming flotilla in history was launched. But as dozens of yachts hoisted their anchors and the rowers charged the beaches, warning signs were all around them. And then something unexpected happened. Nothing. So our intrepid adventurers are up here in northern Canada trying to traverse the Northwest Passage. But what they find after weeks of sailing and rowing through these frigid waters is the ice cap that they were told would not even be there is actually there. And it's actually not receding at all. And so everywhere they go, they're blocked by this giant wall of ice, and they're unable to even reach most of the archipelago. So for the next few weeks, the captains aboard these boats are in constant contact with their land-based support crews and with the Canadian Meteorological Society, advising as to what the situation is and explaining that there's this giant wall of ice everywhere they go and icebergs everywhere, and asking how they can get through the ice, changing courses, changing itineraries. Until the Canadian Meteorological Society, who's in complete denial, expecting the record melt, etc., finally they look at their satellite data and they realize that what these captains are saying is absolutely correct. That not only has the ice produced a year-on-year record growth, but that it's also expanded to the thickest sheet of ice ever recorded by modern science. So the entire expedition has been shanghaied and it's going nowhere. And then the unthinkable happened. The climate began to cool. Blizzards began to besiege the boats, and urgent calls on the ship's radios warned that the Arctic exit points were beginning to freeze over. The southern escape route was slamming shut. The trap of a broken spring had sprung, and the shortest Arctic summer in history was over. The race for glory and global warming now became a race for survival. But as the panic-stricken fleet turned and reached all sheets towards the safe harbor south, it became clear to the captains tacking through the iceberg-strewn waters that their ships would never leave the Northwest Passage. The regatta was lost, and like a school of desperate whales locked in a freezing bay, the fleet was trapped in a frozen world in one of the most desolate and deadly places on Earth, with the ice closing in all around them. Suddenly, distress beacons were flashing across the Arctic as the airwaves erupted with calls for help. What followed was the largest Arctic rescue season in Canadian history. From coast to coast and all across northern Canada, the Canadian military and Coast Guard were mobilized. And one of the first calls was from a trapped group of Americans living under a tarp on the open deck of a steel-hulled supply ship stuck in the ice. It was Steve Mole and the reality TV crew Dangerous Waters. Just weeks into filming, they had been snared by waters more dangerous than expected. Their engines clogged with ice and survival suits frozen, the men had fought their way to the coast. But a polar bear attack on their camp had destroyed their tent and forced the men to retreat to the seas, living aboard their supply ship awaiting rescue. As Dangerous Waters was being ferried to safer lands by Canadian icebreaker, another team was being airlifted out of the Arctic. This time it was Kevin Vallely and the crew of Arctic Jewel. The team of world-class rowers had muscled their way midway through the passage, only to reach the impenetrable interior and become pinned to the coast by the record pack ice. The expedition made possible by global warming had been stopped cold. And although the Canadian Coast Guard worked frantically to free the frozen and escort the errant, at least 22 yachts remained trapped, abandoned or on the hard, lost to the polar passage. Shipping lanes were blocked, communities cut off. The Canadian government declared a state of emergency. The experts blamed global warming and a melting polar ice cap. Russia ordered the urgent evacuation of its SP-40 global warming research base. A British explorer froze to death on the second night of an expeditionary trek across the supposedly warming Greenland ice sheet. One of the world's foremost global warming scientists and a Canadian Coast Guard commander were killed when their helicopter was forced down during a scouting mission over the ice. Dr. Klaus Hochheim, PhD climatologist from the University of Manitoba, was finishing his 25th year of global warming research aboard the Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker Amundsen, and had joined the ship's commander, Captain Mark Thibault, on an airborne reconnaissance mission as the ship encountered heavy ice. Tragically, reports indicate that both men and the pilot survived impact, but despite survival suits, succumbed to hypothermia in the frozen Northwest Passage. And to give you an idea of just how complete this environmental collapse was, even the undisputed masters of this realm, whose ancestors had plied these waters for thousands of years, were suddenly unable to navigate them. And with their hunters unable to reach open water, the walrus harvest crashed, falling up to 83% in some villages, as food shortage panic swept through Eskimo communities across the Arctic. And while Alaskans rushed to donate food to their Eskimo neighbors, the U.S. government declared the region under state of natural disaster. And lastly, guys, Charles Hedridge, trapped in ice at the top of the world, unable to go forward, appears to have gone native. Taken in by an Inuit family at the remote village where he washed ashore, the world's greatest adventurer still locked in the Northwest Passage and living among them at last report. And then something unbelievable happens. You know what happens next? Nothing! Everybody just pretends like all of this really didn't just happen. Reality just melts away, and the media, even the local media up there, keep pumping out article after article about the melting Arctic. Then they come up with this new one where I guess the Arctic did melt, but the North Pole melted also, and it all blew down into northern Canada. So a couple of these global warming activists from our global warming fleet in the Northwest Passage, they're blocked by ice, and they get downwind of the story, and they think, aha, we could be the first catamaran to sail across the North Pole. So they head up that way, and guess what happens? But it doesn't matter because the media decides what reality is. Snow on the Sphinx, growing glaciers, the third coldest winter in U.S. history. It's all because global warming melted the North Pole. So these Russian guys, I guess they didn't get the memo because they drive a caravan of buses pulling multiple trailers and 6,000 pounds of fuel from Russia to Canada right over the top of the North Pole. And the media, not just in this country, but around the world, totally ignores it. It's so cold in here that my thermometer's broken. It's the coldest storm we've seen in our lives, and it's all because of global warming.